Hello, everybody. It's Friday, April 3rd. I'm Michael Kerman with Leading Edge Seminars, and I want to welcome you all for our virtual lunch together with Lisa Ferentz. Thanks for joining us. Welcome back to those of you who joined us for lunch before, and for new folks. I want to thanks also, special thanks to JK Seminars, who is spreading the word to our American colleagues. We're a Canadian company, and we have lots of people in Canada watching us, and the word is spreading to the States. Also, thanks to the Ontario Association of Mental Health Professionals for letting their folks know about this. And finally, another thanks. I'm very grateful today for lots of things, actually. But thanks to you who've been watching for all the feedback you've been sending, suggestions and comments. It's really been great. So for everybody, just an update on this live storm platform. First, you'll see a question bar in the upper right-hand section of your screen. You should see it. And anytime you have a question, feel free to type it out. And if you have a question for Lisa that you are willing to go on camera later in this hour, we'll hold time for questions. And if you'd like to go on camera, just put all video or something, and we'll see if we can get you on camera. I know we won't have an opportunity to get to all the questions, but we will do the best we can. If there are technical problems, and so far we've been doing pretty well with this Livestorm platform, remember that everything we do, including our virtual lunches, are archived immediately on our website. You'll be able to see it this afternoon. So if there's some reference or something you'd like to hear again, something you missed, it's there. It's always free. You can even watch our, I think, 7 previous virtual lunches with some terrific people. They're all on our website for you. I'd like to start off before introducing Lisa, just to say a few words about the current situation. I know it's very, very hard. We're hearing terrible news continually, and sometimes it seems to be getting worse. But at the same time, I would like to remind myself and everyone that our birthright is resilience, something we talked about with Linda Graham the other day. We're meant to survive. We have the DNA of ancestors who survived very, very hard times. And hopefully that DNA is part of us. Nevertheless, in times like this, we all can falter. It's especially tough for people who've had deep trauma histories, people you're working with right now and who you used to see in your office. We need all of us to be especially kind and compassionate to everybody, including ourselves, when we falter. You know, we've all experienced difficult times in the past, and we think about how we've handled it. So think about the funeral gatherings you've gone to, where there's great feelings of loss and sometimes shock and sadness. Nevertheless, when people gather together in person like those old days, at a funeral reception or in the coming weeks, and they connect with family and friends, there are stories, people reminisce, they laugh, and they connect with each other, and that connection brings healing. And the connection is very, very important. So we're in these days now. It's especially important to maintain connections with families, friends, and colleagues. And there's so many connections going on through the internet, new resources, people Facebooking in various ways. So that's really good news among the bad news. This is what we're doing at Leading Edge Seminars. We've gone online for everything that we do. And sometimes it'd be confusing to figure out what we're doing. So we have 3 things we're doing. First, these free virtual lunches. They're every weekday. Next Monday, we'll have Terry Reel. Tuesday, we'll have someone else from the Baltimore area, like Lisa, Lynn Grodsky, who really is the Dean of Professional Practice Development. And she'll be here talking about that topic over lunch on Tuesday. And there's lots more interesting people. Just have a look at our website for our list. And you can register for free. You'll get your confirmation. You'll join us like you're doing right now, hopefully. Now, there's something else we started to do, and those are our mini webinars. These are immediately relevant 2-hour trainings done by many terrific people, really focused on how you can help your clients right now in this environment. They're $40. You're usually eligible for CEUs. They're archived for 3 months. You can watch them again. Lisa will actually be joining us later on in April to do a 2-hour program. Tomorrow, Leanna Lowenstein on working with children online, a lot of tips and techniques. She's a very experienced play therapist. We're going to have Janina Fisher, and we just announced that Stephen Porges will be presenting a 2-hour mini webinar along with Deb Dana on using all the knowledge that he has uh, researched and provided to mental health professionals and the world about the polyphagal theory. And he'll be talking about its relevance. Deb Dana, who's a practitioner, will be talking about how to use it. And finally, our spring series, and Lisa will be part of that as well in June, is all live and interactive. We're adding some bells and whistles to make them more fun. They'll also be archived for future use. And we'll be beginning our spring series with IFS expert and wonderful human being, Frank Anderson, on April 23rd and 24th. So that's all on our website. Please have a look. So I want to tell you a few things about Lisa, who's in the green room downstairs on the bottom of your screen. Lisa is a recognized expert. Oh, she's come up.
Hello,
Hi,
hello.
Lisa. You're going to
I-
have to listen to me and smile or frown or do whatever one does when in the screen.
yeah.
Lisa is a recognized expert in the strengths-based um, depathologized treatment of trauma, and she's been in private practice for 35 years. She presents workshops internationally, all over North America. She consults to many practitioners and to mental health agencies in North America and in the world, really. And then she runs the Ferentz Institute, which I'll tell you about, and she can tell you about a little later. She combines many years of practice, over 35, and she learned a lot from her clients along the way. She's always had a broad knowledge of treatment modalities for trauma in particular. And recently, in the last number of years, she's been more and more integrating terrific ideas from expressive arts approaches and from the internal family systems parts approach. Now, when she shares her understanding techniques, she exemplifies a kind of groundedness and positive life energy. Now, I've seen this because Lisa, you've done workshops in our room, and
Yes.
the topic can be trauma, self-destructive behavior. But your energy is like contagious. People, I've someone commented to me, "Why are people looking so happy?" Someone was outside the room and said, "Well, they were just in a workshop on treating trauma survivors who are have seriously self-destructive behaviors." So uh, I really appreciate both all the information and again the energy and the warmth you bring into the room, and you're going to bring onto the screen. So welcome.
Thank you.
I want to say one other thing about you. When you've probably never been introduced like this, so audience, listen to this. Of all our presenters, no one knows more about Broadway musicals and can sing so many songs from Broadway musicals than Lisa Ferentz and her family. So that's something else about Lisa. So Lisa, it's tough times in a lot of ways. Great you're here. So how has it been going for you personally and professionally over this last while?
Well, first, I just have to say hello to you. You are such a dear, dear friend to me, and I want to thank you for what you're doing. I think now more than ever, as you alluded to, this idea of finding creative ways for us to stay connected and to see each other's faces and smiles is just so essential. I'm not surprised that you have put something like this together because it's so in keeping with who you are as a human being. So. I wish I could hug you. I'm hugging you virtually. Right. How have I been? It's a great question. It's a question we're kind of all asking each other. And I think, unlike in the past where we expect the automatic fine, how are you? It's not so easy just to say fine. It's really challenging. And it's challenging, I think, on a lot of levels for those of us who are practitioners. It's challenging because we still need to be holding that same reassuring, comforting space that we hold, whenever we're with our clients. And it's harder to do that when I think for two reasons. One, because we may have our own fears and concerns and anxieties about what's going on in the world, what's going on in our stock portfolio, what's going on in terms of our own health and well-being. I think it's very challenging to make the shift from face-to-face therapy to online therapy, particularly when you're working with trauma survivors. Um, We can certainly talk about that. Like you, I have an institute, and I'm also, in the throes of trying to convert all of the live trainings, which are energetically are so wonderful, to an online platform where it sort of still feels like you're talking through glass. So the transition of all those things is complicated and hard. I love though that you also talked about gratitude, because I think that in some ways now more than ever, noticing the smaller things that we can be grateful for. I'm taking a lot of walks because it's the only other thing that I can do, that any of us can do, right? In between this and doing online therapy sessions. And as weird as this might sound, I swear I'm noticing the buds on the trees in ways that I never have before. I'm noticing that, fortunately, I live in a lovely, lovely neighborhood. So there's lots of flowers, there's lots of trees, and there's lots of people, old and young, because all the kids are out of school, walking and riding on their bikes and their scooters. And here's what I love: nobody's on a cell phone. Nobody. And I think it's partly because we're spending a lot of extra time staring at screens that we kind of we need a break and relief from that. So when we walk, even though we're, on opposite sides of the street, the waving that we're doing and the smiling that we're doing is so authentic and real. And so I feel grateful for that. I feel grateful that I'm seeing people in my neighborhood. I had no idea they lived here. That might not sound so great, but
No.
right. So I feel grateful. There's tons of children in my neighborhood, and I really had no idea. So I think if we can find a way to kind of balance and juxtapose very real and legitimate concerns and worry and anxiety, because I don't think we should minimize or downplay that, but try to hold it within a context of gratitude. And as much as I bitch and complain about online platforms, I am so grateful that they exist, so that we can do this, and so that I can so that I can continue to do my work with my clients.
Well, that's very true. I'll tell you one thing, that when I go for walks, what I've noticed is Toronto's never been known as a particularly friendly city in terms of walking on the street. And I know in other places, certainly in the West Coast, and I'm sure in other cities or regions, people smile at strangers. That
Yeah.
didn't used to happen in Toronto, and it's happening now. There's just a sense of, isn't it nice to see you?
Yeah.
So that's the report from Canada. Uh,
Here. Yeah.
yeah, is that happening there too?
Oh, 100%. And in some ways,
Okay.
Michael, I think it's kind of analogous to what happened after 9/11. Because I'm from New York, and going back to New York, and my sister lives in New York, and my parents are in New York. And they kept saying to me, people are opening cab doors and offering the cab to someone else. Now, that never happens in Manhattan, ever. But for months and months after 9/11, people were just extraordinarily kind. And again, I love that you alluded to that in your introduction as well, that now more than ever, part of the antidote to all of this is to have a really conscious sense of being compassionate and kind.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Now, some people know you very well from your work and your books and your presentations. You might be new to some people. So let's roll back the camera and talk about your career path, how you got from there to here.
So it's funny that you alluded to me and Broadway shows and musicals, because when I was much younger, all I wanted to do was be a Broadway star. That was it. That was the goal. Just a small little little ambition. Um, so I did figure out by the time I was in my mid 20s that was what I was really was gonna be was a waitress, and so I realized that I had to do something, a little bit more than that. Not that there's anything wrong with being a waitress. Um, so I've also, because I'm the oldest of four, my mom has always been fond of saying that as far back as she can remember, maybe when I was 5 or 6, I'd sit on the front stoop of our house, and all of the kids in the neighborhood, and I really don't remember this, but my mom swears by it, that I'd sit on the step and all the kids in the neighborhood would come sit next to me and they would tell me their problems. And and I don't know I honestly don't know how I responded, but certainly being the oldest of four siblings, I'm very close to them. I kind of was the mediator in my family. And so I did have those natural skills and abilities. And so once I figured out I wasn't going to be a Broadway star, I thought the next best thing was to be a therapist. And what I love, though, is the confluence of all my years of doing theater and then being able to do stuff like this, with a lot of comfort and ease. So I was a little bit of an outlier when I started out because I got my master's in social work here in Maryland. My husband and I vowed that we'd be on the first Amtrak back to New York when we both got our degrees, but here I am 37 years later, still in Baltimore. But I was a bit of an outlier because back then the term private practice was not uttered in the halls of the School of Social Work. It was all very macro in its approach. I just knew very, very early on in my career that I really wanted to do private practice. I wanted to have that ability to frankly control the way that I did the work to bring in the paradigms that I wanted to bring in and to use some of my theater stuff, to be creative, to do role playing. And this is before I learned about using art techniques or sand tray. So I've been in private practice really my whole career.
So if we had a video of your early treatment modalities and what you were trained in and what you started to work in, what would have that looked like?
I think it would be a combination of wonderful and horrifying. So I think the thing that would be wonderful is that I believe I've always had the ability to exude a lot of compassion. I care deeply, deeply about my clients. I am not a trauma survivor. And so I've always kind of approached my clients with this real curiosity and almost awe about their resiliency and all the creative ways in which they have survived their life experiences. So I think you'd see that, even when I was totally green. But I think the part that's horrifying is how most of us in the early 80s, frankly, were trained to work with trauma, which was really to push clients to retrieve as much of their memories as quickly as possible, sometimes to even relive a lot of those experiences. And so if you looked at the video, you'd see people in the fetal position crying, and you would see me making a lot of referrals to inpatient, to Shepherd Pratt and inpatient hospitals. That's the part that horrifies me. What I was not taught to do back in the day was any kind of affect regulation skills for my clients, like no resourcing, none. It was just get to the trauma narrative, get them to talk about what happened. And of course, as you well know, because trauma is actually not stored in the languaging part of the brain, much of the time when we would ask clients to tell us what happened, we'd get either a dissociative glazed look, or we'd get a shoulder shrug, or we'd get, I know something happened, but I can't explain it. And back in the day, we were taught to label that as resistant and non-compliant and uncooperative and borderline. And so thank God the work looks very, very, very different now. And I'm sure it does for most of our listeners who work with trauma, who are well aware that we don't go to trauma retrieval until we first really spend the time that we need to help our clients to be resourced.
And just continuing on this theme, I look back at what's happened over the last 30 or 40 years, when there have been new awarenesses and new practices that come into being. I remember when narrative was first presented in Toronto, and not by me, in the early 90s, 800 people came to that workshop. Can you imagine? I've
Wow.
never heard one since. And that became part of people's thinking, oh, narrative therapy. And of course, over the years, other kinds of therapies people started to integrate into their practice and
Yes.
became part of who they were. So what was your progression of integration of, oh, I read this book, I saw this speaker, and I have to start kind of thinking along these lines to help my clients in a different way or other ways?
Yeah. So again, in grad school, it was all about talk therapy, and certainly CBT was, and I say that with an eye roll because I think, 37 years later, that's still the number one paradigm that gets promoted in many master's programs, but certainly CBT. You will be delighted to know, because I know a little bit about your background as well, that Ericksonian hypnosis was really the very, very first paradigm. I know that you've got a great feeling of warmth and a great connection to that. That was probably the mid 80s when I started to go to the Psychotherapy Networker, and I saw people like Dick Schwartz, who has gone on to become a dear friend and mentor, and Steve Langton and Yvonne Dolan and Jeffrey Schwartz, really kind of people whom I called, including you, kind of the 12 disciples, although I don't know if there are 12 of you, but those of you who had the great privilege really of sitting at the feet of Erickson. That was my first introduction to a whole other way to begin to work with clients, to bring in metaphor, to work on a less conscious level, to really use the therapeutic relationship in much deeper and more profound kind of ways. So that opened my eyes big time. But Michael, my joke now is that I spent the first half of my career learning how to get people into trance, and I've spent the second half of my career trying to get people out of their trance states. So that's really kind of been the trajectory in a way, because as I started to work with more and more traumatized and dissociative clients, they were sort of living in this altered state of freeze or hypervigilance. And so I knew that I wanted to keep integrating, again, the more creative theater-based stuff that was just so near and dear to my heart. And so learning about how to incorporate some elements of psychodrama and Gestalt double chairing was something that I loved using a lot. And then when I started my institute, or maybe before then, I had a lot of colleagues who were actually art therapists and were considered very fringe and weird, right? And movement therapists, dance therapists who were considered weird and fringe. And now I like to say that they were about 30 years ahead of the rest of us. They really understood way before the rest of us did about the extraordinary importance of bringing in right brain-based expressive modalities. And so fortunately, I was instantly inspired and motivated to want to weave that into my work. When I put a sand tray in my office, wow, that became
Mm.
one sand scene was the equivalent of 2 months of talk therapy. It was quite remarkable. And then, as I mentioned, Dick very, very generously began to mentor me pretty early in my career, way before he was famous, I should add, when he was first just conceptualizing the idea of internal family systems and all this stuff about parts. And it resonated for me because I was working with folks who back then were diagnosed with what was called multiple personality disorder, right, which we now call DID. So I was seeing parts and alters all the time, in my office. And so when Dick began to conceptualize it in the way that he did, that also, really clicked and immediately resonated for me. And so I will be honest and say that I'm not a purist when it comes to IFS, but certainly the notion of moving beyond a monolithic view of the self, and that we all have aspects and parts to who we are, and leading from, what Dick calls self, and I sometimes call our wisest, most compassionate part. That's become a really integral part of the work that I do as a clinician. I am all about helping people to access and build on self-compassion.
Mhm. I think one of your real contributions has had to do with post-traumatic growth because, I think for the longest time, if you had a client who had severe trauma and you could get them to just be as normally miserable as everybody else is most of the time, or kind of a normal kind of functioning, but without the trauma,
Yeah.
people would say, I've succeeded with this client. Look at the symptom list. They're not doing that. They're not doing that. They're not doing that. Thank you very much. You're cured, in a sense, if I can use that language. But
Yeah.
you saw something else.
Yeah, and to be honest, Michael, it started in grad school when I took psychopathology. And
Hmm?
my psychopathology professor, God bless him, but what he wanted us to do was to open the DSM. And I am old enough that it was the first DSM. There were no,
Oh.
yeah, that's how old I am. So we would open the DSM and we would talk about the clients we were seeing in field placement. And basically, the name of the game was, how many DSM diagnoses can you give your client? So the focus was on what's wrong with your client, right? And even then, as a totally green grad student, that just did not work for me. It didn't speak to me. It angered me. It frustrated me. And I remember, I've told this story actually in other trainings. I remember because I have a New York part. I'm from New York, so we have an assert. Those of us who are New Yorkers are not shy. And so I raised my hand in class and I said to the professor, with all due respect, when are we going to start talking about what's right about our clients? And there was just dead silence. We never got there. We never talked about what was right about our clients. It was always what was wrong with them. And so when from day one in my private practice, again, I was always interested in, and this is very much a part of what post-traumatic growth taps into, I was interested in their strengths, in their resiliency. I wanted to know how they were still standing, given everything that they had endured. I work with folks who like grew up in metaphoric war zones, who have been abused in every conceivable way that you can imagine, who had to become quite fragmented just to survive that. But even DID, I never saw as mental illness. I saw it as this remarkably creative coping strategy. And so post-traumatic growth, when I began to learn about it, I did not create it. I think Martin Seligman actually was one of the
Hmm.
folks, yeah, with his positive psychology movement. And it's kind of cool because Martin Seligman, most clinicians know that name and associate it with learned helplessness, right? Because he kind of
Hmm.
does that. But I think in the late 90s, early 2000, he had some kind of epiphany and he said, I don't want to keep talking about learned helplessness. I want to talk about learned happiness. And that was really the onset of the positive psychology movement. And so with that, we do focus much more on resiliency and strengths and what's right about our client. And you're right, it's not just checking off those symptoms are no longer present. It's reconnecting people spiritually. It's helping them to find ways to attach meaning to their past trauma so that they can begin to pay it forward. It's giving them ideas and helping them come up with ideas so that they can use their life experiences to inspire other people. It's helping them to have a newfound sense of self. Trauma is something that happened to you. It's not who you are. So it's really sort of broadening their narratives about who they are. And that's what I love about post-traumatic growth is it's like a whole other level of work that we can bring our clients to.
Do you remember the early cases where you started to think about the growth possibilities and you saw some of your clients going from having very difficult lives to kind of blossoming in ways that you might not have predicted?
I'm going to tell you, Michael, every client I've ever had the privilege of working with has surprised me in just that way. Obviously, what I've learned over the years is not to assume, not to predict someone's growth trajectory. I've worked with clients who have grown in ways I never thought possible. I've worked with clients who've forgiven abusers that, frankly, I still haven't forgiven on their behalf because they were so horrifically abused. And I've worked with people who I actually thought maybe would get a lot further in life than they chose to. And I think for everybody listening, in order for us to not burn out in this field, we have to be really clear that ultimately it is a choice that our clients make. It's very much what self-determination is about. And so I hold out hope for every client I work with, and I tell them that in the very first visit. I say to them, you may not have a whole lot of hope right now. I know that you have a hopeful part because that's the part that picked up the phone and called me and made the appointment. That's the part that drove here today. That's the part that sat in my waiting room 15 minutes early. For me, that's a hopeful part, but I don't want to minimize the pain that you're in. So know that if there are moments or days or weeks or months where you don't have a lot of hope, you can lean on mine because I have hope for you. And I do. I have hope for every client I've ever worked with because it's what you alluded to in the beginning, which is that we are wired for resiliency. We're wired to survive. I think what therapists can do is they can help clients learn to turn inward and to move away from the criticism and the judgment and to instill and reconnect with that self-compassion. Because I think that there's nothing more important than the way we talk to ourselves about ourselves. I think that kind of drives everything. And so one of the big differences, to go back to your earlier question, what would look different on video? In the early days, if a client would say something like, I know this is really stupid, but, and then they'd keep going, I wouldn't say anything. Now, if a client says, I know this is really stupid, I immediately put up my hand. And I say, wait. Let's rewind the tape. Is there a less judgmental way that you can say that? Is there a kinder, more compassionate way that you can say that? And honestly, Michael, sometimes that happens 20 times in a session. So this idea of really bringing into my clients' conscious awareness how they talk to themselves about themselves and really helping them to begin to harness that self-compassion that's where I think that post-traumatic growth, the sky is the limit if you can talk to yourself with kindness.
Well, certainly some of the most inspiring stories I've ever heard have been people who've suffered so greatly and then contributed to the world in ways that they never would have imagined.
That's right.
Uh, in order, I'd like to look at some of your contributions through your writing
Hmm.
as a way of people to get to know you better, because you took on uh, helping therapists and helping clients with very self-destructive behaviors. So I think by way of looking at your books, why don't you tell us about your treating self-destructive behaviors in trauma survivors, how it led to the workbook, and then we're going to talk about ruby slippers.
Okay, great. So what led me to write the first book, it's now in its second edition, but the first book, Treating Self-Destructive Behavior in Trauma Survivors, what led me to write that was my realization that I was doing it all wrong, and that I was actually inadvertently creating power struggles with my clients when I forced them to sign standard safety contracts, because that's what I was taught to do. I actually saw an exacerbation of their self-destructive behavior. I was inadvertently shaming them for their behaviors, because what I think I was leading from was my own anxious part and wanting them to just like stop it and knock it off. And so once I figured out that that was not working, I took a completely different approach, where I decided that I really was not the teacher, I was the student, and that my clients who were engaging in a wide range of destructive behaviors, eating disorder behaviors, acts of self-mutilation, any form of addiction, I realized that I had to really allow myself to get very humble and to ask them to teach me. Why do you do this? What do you get from this? In other words, rather than focusing so immediately on let's figure out how to get you to stop doing it, I first had to really learn and understand why they were doing it, because they were doing it a lot. And human nature is such that we don't keep doing something unless we really get something from it. And that's when I began to understand about the deeper meta communication of destructive behavior, and the fact that it really is a way for clients not only to self-soothe and numb, but also to tell their trauma narratives in a kind of nonverbal way. Once I learned that from them, it completely changed the way that I worked with the behavior, not just the immediate extinction of it. I also figured out that I couldn't. It was like if you just ask somebody to stop doing it, you're sort of playing whack-a-mole. Do you have that game in Toronto?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So if I knock down cutting, right? If I just knock that down, typically up comes drinking, right? Or up comes an eating disorder. And so I realized that if we're going to work towards letting go of cutting, then I have to give you viable replacements. I have to give you other ways to communicate your narrative, to self-soothe, to release endorphins, to feel better. So that's kind of what inspired me to write the book. And then once I wrote the book for clinicians, and then I wrote a second edition that includes this whole piece about self-compassion, I realized that clients needed more guidance, and more suggestions about, okay, so if I'm going to let go of my self-destructive behavior, what can I replace it with? And that's what sort of inspired me to write the workbook, Letting Go of Self-Destructive Behavior. So there's hundreds of different ways, in addition to psychoeducation about trauma and attachment and why people turn towards destructive behaviors and what the cycle of self-harm is about. And I describe what dissociation is about and what triggers are about. There's also art prompts and journaling prompts and guided imagery and breath work, so that we can help clients more authentically and organically let go of their destructive behavior, because they've then replaced that behavior with healthier ways to self-soothe and to tell their stories.
So the workbook is really full of tools and ideas. Now, were most of these things you did in therapy, or did you integrate other therapists' approaches in there?
It's really mostly stuff that I did, but definitely inspired by Dick and Part's work. So there's a lot of referencing to that as well. And frankly, it's a lot of what my clients were doing. Again, even now, 36 years later, I still, between you and me, consider that they are the teachers and I'm the student.
You have a particular exercise or expressive arts approach that a
Yeah.
client suggested to you, and you said, "Wow," and then you use it in the book? Are there any? I don't like putting the spot, but was there something
Yeah.
that came out of
I
of
would
your
say
sessions?
something that kind of collaboratively came out of a session between myself and a client who had 50 altars and who I had the privilege of working with for about 28 years. So we did a whole lot of work together, but she integrated all 50 altars. So that was quite remarkable and amazing to witness. But what we did was I invited her because I wanted to help her to kind of, she was cutting on her hand, which is a very common place where people cut. And I suggested, I invited her to, when the next time she got the impulse to do that, to instead draw her hand and draw the cut marks. And that actually led to what I created, something called Caress, which is the alternative to standard safety contracts, which I think we'll talk a lot about when I do the training in June for you. Right. So she drew the hand. She kind of took it to another level, though. She started to really, like in detail, draw the cut marks and the burn marks. And then she took it to the next place where she began to write. And what she was writing basically was if her wounds could talk.
Mm.
This is what they were saying. And so that was an extraordinary, sort of breakthrough for her that I've used many, many, many times since with other clients. What's cool about it is you're integrating both the left and right hemisphere when you draw and then you write. And the question is, if your wounds could talk, what would they say? And she really inspired me to bring on that piece of kind of decoding and adding language to what she was drawing.
No, that's a very, very good example. Now I
Yeah.
want to move on to Finding Your Ruby Slippers, Transformative Life Lessons from the Therapist's Couch. It's a very unusual book. It's it's personal, it's for everybody, and it's about transforming lives. So how'd you get this idea, and what's this book about for people who haven't had a chance to read it? And it makes great shelter from sheltering reading.
Right.
Yes. If you're home a lot these days and you're looking for something nice to read for therapists and for everybody, find your Ruby Slippers. What's it about?
Thank you. Yeah, this one really is not only for everyone, but whether this is good or bad, it's quite appropriate and applicable to what we're all going through now. Ultimately, what it's about is helping people to learn how to talk to themselves in ways that are kinder and more compassionate. So there's a whole bunch of mantras that then offer a whole bunch of journal prompts so that people can begin to turn inward. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's no such thing as you made your bed, now lie in it. That's something that I feel very strongly about, that we always have the opportunity to change and to change direction and to make new decisions and choices for ourselves in life. There's nothing more powerful than the way you talk to yourself about yourself. That's one of the mantras as well. So it's just very simple. I have to tell you, I think unconsciously, Michael, I was inspired by you and the book that you wrote, those Pearls of Wisdom. Still one of my all-time favorite, but we need to plug your book as well. One of my favorite books. So they're little pearls of wisdom. They're little mantras that have very positive, compassionate feel to them. And then again, the opportunity to journal. I give you very specific journal prompts that enable you to kind of look inward, but very optimistic, very hopeful. There's a whole section on gratitude, which again I think is really important now. There's a section on relationships. There's a section on just enhancing our sense of self-esteem and self-worth. So in my mind, it's applicable to everybody and to all of us.
I'm thinking, and this isn't a shameless plug, and this wasn't rehearsed, but especially these days, people may be home for the next 2 or 3 months. These are hard times. It's not ending soon. This is the kind of resource that therapists could read or share with their clients. And it's like automatic homework assignments that people could do. It might be especially relevant for now.
Yeah, good. And you asked me what kind of inspired, because I know it sounds like a strange title, Finding Your Ruby Slippers. It really is inspired by the movie The Wizard of Oz, where Dorothy spends the entire movie trying to find her way home. She thinks that the wizard has the answer, right? And they get to the Emerald City and Toto pulls away the curtain. It's just a short guy pulling levers. And Dorothy is, totally despondent because, uh-oh, there is no magical wizard. He doesn't have the answer. And then in this beautiful moment, Glinda comes down in that bubble and basically she says to Dorothy, look at your own feet. You've been wearing the ruby slippers all along. And so that's always stayed with me. And that's the message that this book really ultimately imparts, is that everything that you need to heal, to have confidence, to have a sense of worth, to make healthy choices is inside of you. And it's just doing what Dick calls that U-turn, right? It's just going, it's turning inward to be able to kind of, I always say to people, this is not about reinventing you, it's about reclaiming you.
I think let's see, we have about 20 minutes, so let's get to some questions.
Sure.
So here's one about trauma therapist uses sand tray. Have you had any experience using that virtually?
So I have not.
Sand tray.
Yeah, I love Santray, and I'm thrilled that you're using Santray, Kelly. I've not had experience using it virtually only because I'm not in my office. I'm doing all of my telehealth sessions from literally my living room, and my Santray is in my office, and it's heavy and not portable. But I think it would not be impossible if you have a smaller version of a Santray. I actually think that's a really clever and creative idea. And as long as your client feels safe and comfortable and has privacy, then why not? I just, my Sentray is clinical size. It's my hands are, I know, are out of the screen. It's bigger. It's bigger than my hands can show you. So that's why it's not portable. But if you can do a small one, why not? And if you have, figures available to you wherever you're doing your telehealth now, go for it.
Hmm. Okay, Alexis asked, do you have any recommendations of how to promote trauma prevention skills as this pandemic develops?
Hmm.
Tough one, but throwing it at you.
Yeah. Um, I guess I'm not 100% sure what you mean by trauma prevention. Do you mean sort of like not getting PTSD as a byproduct of?
I think Alexis means that Alexis isn't right again, but I guess right now with the pandemic, there might be more possibilities of people feeling a trauma and other things we can do in advance to help them. That's my guess.
Yeah. You know, I,
Tough
I
one.
yeah, I think though that part of the answer, because look, everybody's going to respond to what's unfolding differently, and a lot of that is going to be contingent upon whether or not you have a prior trauma history. I'm going to talk in the webinar that I'm going to do in later in April about that very topic. That for folks who have a prior trauma history, everything that's unfolding now with COVID-19 and with even just having to do telehealth, the impact is different. But I do think that what fundamentally makes the difference between whether we go on to develop PTSD or even acute stress symptoms or not has everything to do with the extent to which we are openly processing whatever we are experiencing and feeling as it's unfolding. What we know in the world of trauma is that one of the things that makes it so difficult and so painful and leaves our clients so symptomatic is being alone in their trauma. And so as this unfolds, my recommendation is that we just keep creating these platforms and these arenas and these Zoom meetings and these chat rooms where we can just feel seen and validated and heard, and where we can just use our voices and say, I woke up today feeling really frightened. I woke up today feeling really worried. I think using our voices is a key piece to the processing, right, of everything that's unfolding. I have a couple of clients who've been doing a ton of journaling, writing some really remarkable and beautiful poems and lyrics to songs and blogging. And I think all of those vehicles are ways in which we can be processing as this unfolds so that it's not kind of getting, stuck energetically on our bodies, if that helps.
Yeah, I also thought there are a lot of there's a lot of resources about coping these days.
Yeah.
Having structure in your life, having exercise, not lying on the couch all day. I've read some very interesting articles about helping children
Mm.
uh, cope better. So I guess there are resources that people could pay attention to, which would be very helpful and to share with clients or ourselves and our families.
And I'll just throw two out. You're exactly right. So Headspace is an excellent one, and calm.com. Calm.com. You can get a free 7-day trial with that. And there's really nice meditations, and you can actually select if you want a meditation about anxiety versus stress versus self-esteem. So those apps are great. YouTube is putting up some terrific videos, both for mindfulness meditation and also yoga classes and exercise classes. It's kind of cool, and my clients are telling me all this. I just did a yoga class on YouTube. So you're exactly right. It's getting up in the morning and showering and getting dressed and making sure that you're walking outside. We are doing social distancing, but we're not supposed to do total isolation.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm just going to change the focus a little bit to what's going on now to Mylene, who asks about your experience with PTSD in the military and how you would assist veterans to return to a new sense of self, create a new normal in the civilian life. And this is kind of a pre-pandemic question, but also I'm sure very real for military people who are struggling because there's been so much PTSD in the military.
Yeah. So I want to be, honest and say I don't have an expertise in treating vets. We all can't have expertise in everything, and I'm more than happy to say all the things I don't have expertise about.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't want to give false information, or that's just not. I don't work with that population. God bless the people who do. And you're right. Now with first responders, I think nurses, doctors, emergency room workers, firefighters, people who are being exposed to folks who have the virus and who are then contracting the virus themselves. I think there is going to be this whole additional wave of first responders who are going to need a lot of support to get through what they're witnessing.
Yeah. Yeah, here's a question that just came in from Debbie Bauer, who's a therapist in Toronto, and she talks about clients who have many years in ingrained pattern to be not self-compassionate, lots of self-blame, all that stuff. Do you spend a lot of time on the past or focus on the present?
So thank you for the question, Debbie. I think it's a twofold answer. Um, Here's where I focus on the past. If the client really has trouble accessing initially that their own inner wisdom, and I don't want to be glib about that because there are lots of traumatized folks who, even when you bring up the concept of turn to your wisest part, they just kind of look at you like you're crazy. Let's go to that compassion. They don't have any. So the past comes in handy in that regard when you can do something that I've borrowed from Babette Rothschild's work, which is called remembered resource. So that's where you would ask the client to actually go back in the past, but not to their trauma narrative, rather to a person or a resource from the past that was a genuine source of comfort for them. It can be an extended family member. It sometimes is their third grade math teacher. It is their friend's mother. It is their dog from childhood. And so you access that resource from the past, and then you ask, if your grandmother was sitting with us right now, how would she reframe what you said in a more compassionate way? And my favorite is when you ask the client, well, how would your dog say that in a more compassionate way? And they have an answer. So in that regard, I am going to pull on the past, but again, for the purpose of resourcing a voice that is compassionate and kind. And I'm not going to do trauma retrieval work, if that's part of what you're asking, Debbie, until I know that the client has bought into using some of that positive self-talk and the remembered resourcing first.
Well, I have a question about how things have changed in terms of working online with your private practice clients. What's it been like in the last few weeks for you?
Yeah.
What's changed?
Yeah.
Uh,
And I see my buddy Allison, who I just
oh,
we Allison from Toronto, a wonderful,
okay.
wonderful,
Oh.
wonderful, amazing therapist. I see she's
Well, if
really
you want to get to that question first, I just noticed that
well. I
that's an
think it's kind
interesting
of the
one.
same question. Is that
Okay.
how do we adjust to online?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but there we are.
Yeah.
It is so different energetically. It is so different, and I'm wondering if folks, out there listening, would agree with this. That first of all, it's way more tiring, I find, than doing face to face, because I have to keep up a different level of energy to really help my clients stay connected to staring at a screen, which is a very different experience energetically than sitting in the room with somebody. It's also challenging because, and I don't know if you guys have noticed this, well, hopefully it looks like I'm talking to you, and hopefully it looks like I'm talking to Michael, but I really have not looked at Michael a single time. I am looking at my video camera. And that's one of the most challenging things about, I find, doing teletherapy, is that if you start to look at the client, it's going to look to them like you're looking down. And so what you're going to lose is that ability that we have in live therapy sessions to really stay focused on their face. When I'm talking to them, when I'm giving them guidance, I am not looking at their face. I'm looking at that stupid little camera eye at the top of my laptop screen, because I want to come across as if I'm looking directly at them. Now, when they respond, I will sort of cheat down so that I can see their face. But it's tiring, and there's definitely some degree of misattunement. And I'm not able to catch everything that's unfolding for them. And certainly, because most of the time we get about this much of the client, we lose all that nonverbal stuff that happens on the rest of their body. So I don't know if they're shaking their leg. I don't know if they're clenching their fists. You know, there's a lot of stuff that I pay attention to, because so much of what we communicate is in fact nonverbal. And I find that really all of that gets lost when we're, doing just these sort of profile images of each other. So you have to make adjustments. You have to be mindful of what's behind you. I'm doing this in a corner on my sofa and I'm sitting in my living room, but I had pictures of my family, which I took down because, that was I wanted to be able to retain that degree of privacy. So you have to be mindful of what's behind you, what you do and don't want your client to see, particularly if you're now doing the work from home. You have to be aware that there's enough lighting. The other thing that I think happens just spontaneously is you probably talk louder than you need to. And so the client can experience you as yelling and you will be hoarse at the end of the day. So those are all part of the adjustments that we have to make sort of logistically, just so that there's some semblance of connection, that the client can feel with us. The funny thing that I think has come out of it is suddenly I've seen every client's bedroom. I've seen them in their pajamas. I've seen them before they've showered. I've met their dogs. So you do see some of that stuff when we're doing it online.
I'd like to make two comments about that. First, from what I hear, and other people have said this, Linda Graham said this the other day, a few other people who are therapists said it is so tiring.
It's exhausting.
Much more tiring. So I guess therapist
My dog,
self-care. Hello. Hello. Welcome.
Hello.
So I think taking extra care of yourself, not, you might have lined up people back to back or taken a 10-minute break while you take it's a different ball game now.
That's right. That's right, Michael. I will admit to everybody out there that for 35 years in my private practice, I've always booked people back to back. I love it. I get in a sort of hypnotic zone, and I just do my best work that way. So the first week I was doing this, that's what I did. I booked everybody back to back, and it was a disaster. I mean, not for them, but for me. And so give yourself, please, at least 10 minutes in between every single client that you book, and stand up and move. I get to let my dog out, so I go in the backyard and just get a little air and sun on my face. But you really have to sort of schedule your day differently. You really do, because there's no Janina Fisher, a dear friend of mine, we've been texting at the end of every day. Janina and two other dear friends who are colleagues, just to validate how exhausted we feel and to make sure that we're all not losing our minds. Like, are you tired? Yeah. Are you tired? Okay, then I'm okay. Then this is normal. It's the new normal.
Well, also the new normal has to be, we know we're a lot like our clients in a lot of ways. Maybe we're probably luckier and dealing with life a little bit better, but now we're all in the same boat. And I guess maybe a question that comes out of about appropriate self-disclosure, spending a few minutes on now without getting carried away, because you spend the whole hour talking about, did you hear the latest news?
Yeah.
Which is not the purpose of the therapy. So how do you handle that?
And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the webinar, but I will allude to it now as well. I've learned I have to kind of take their emotional temperature at the start of every online session. I have to ask, tell me how you're doing right now. Tell me what feels most pressing for you right now. So I really do extend that invitation and let them lead. And I'm going to tell you, on average, my clients have spent 15 minutes talking about what's happening now every session. 15 minutes. And I am letting them because, again, I want them to be able to process the anxiety and the stress that they're feeling. What I think we have to be careful about, you're totally right, Michael, we're no different from them. And listen, my sister just tested positive in Maine. So, but I'm not going to tell my clients that. right? I'm not going down that road. And so
You
what,
think you have troubles? Yeah.
you know, my best friend, both her parents are dying in a hospital in New York right now. But I certainly cannot go there with my clients. And so, as I said in the beginning of our conversation, we still need to be the arbiters of holding comfort and reassurance. So we can certainly validate, yes, this is a really scary time. Yes, everything you're feeling about this makes sense. But I think it's equally important that we say to our clients, and it's time limited, and we're going to come out the other side of this, and we're going to pick up the pieces, and we're going to be okay. Because I know, at least from my caseload, which is all traumatized folks, they don't go to that positive mindset. They go down the rabbit hole of it's going to be like this forever, because they have dichotomous thinking, right? They have all nothing thinking. That's kind of part of the cognitive mindset of being traumatized, is that you do all nothing always never. And so our job is to kind of reintroduce that shade of gray that says, and it's going to be time limited, and it's going to get better, and we're going to pick ourselves up, and we're going to keep going. And tell me one thing that you feel grateful for today, right? So that at that point, I'm going to kind of help begin to shift so that we don't spend, because I agree with you, I don't want to spend 50 minutes talking about COVID-19, but I do have clients, and then I have other clients. It's kind of remarkable. I have a client who said, I just want you to know I'm doing okay. I know this is going to end at some point. Can we talk about my dad?
Hmm.
You know, so it's, again, it's just really being where the client is. I have some clients who are doing very deep therapy online, and I have a lot of clients who are not, and I'm just kind of being very fluid and flexible, and really starting where they are. Something we all learn to do in grad school, right, is to be where they are, wherever that is.
And maybe more checking in with what their days are looking like now, so you can get like a view that you might not normally, people in normal life, you kind of do what you do, and now what their routines are and how they're taking care of themselves. And are there
Yeah,
a few more discussions about that than
absolutely.
before?
So listen, so I'm pretty directive about saying you cannot watch the news before you go to bed tonight. You cannot, because that's the last imagery that's going to be in your brain. And that's why you have terminal insomnia. And that's why it's taking you 5 hours to go to sleep. So tell me what you're doing for self care. How many times have you stepped outside today? You know, if it's safe for them to do that. How many times have you stepped outside? Tell me what you're doing for exercise. Tell me what you're eating. Tell me what you've eaten in the last couple of days. Tell me about your sleep habits. Try not to nap during the day, because that's going to completely alter your sleep cycle. So see if you can, you know, stay awake all during the day and then get a good night's sleep at night. So yeah, I'm more directive in terms of kind of asking them for that checklist of what they're doing, and then making suggestions if they're not doing a whole lot of stuff. You know, that this is an amazing opportunity to really gain mastery over self-care. You know, it's an
Well,
opportunity.
yeah, one of the reasons we started the mini webinars is that there isn't the time or the space, and we wanted to devote like 2 hours. So on April 21st, you're going to be talking about navigating the pandemic and teletherapy with trauma survivors. It looks like some of the themes you're going to be exploring, and I think we're about to get these online. So don't try to sign up for right now. Give us a few hours, because it will have a detailed like a workshop description with bullet points. It'll be eligible for CEUs for most people. It'll cost $40. So you're going to be talking about exploring the impact of isolation, rekindling of past trauma, issues of loss, balancing the need for the clients to focus on the virus and to maintain some semblance of continuity, and then also addressing whatever they were working on before. Those are some of the things you'll be addressing, and then you'll be coming to Toronto, not becoming Toronto. You'll
I
be
know.
No, Lisa was going to come to
You.
Toronto June 7th and 8th or something like that, 8th and 9th, to do a 2-day workshop, which was really jam packed with all kind of stuff you used to do in the old days in a room with people. And now we're going to do it virtually. You're going to stay maybe in that room with a dog, maybe with a
Yeah.
dog or not. And people will have a chance to interact. We're going to add some new interactive features, which I haven't even told you about yet.
Oh boy. Okay. I need
Um,
to practice.
yeah, well, dog tricks might be part of them. So we might ask your dog to
She can
do
roll over.
something.
That's about. She can roll over and lick my hand. That's about it.
So a couple more things before we finish off. First, if you want to watch this again, it's online. It'll be there later today. Actually, you'll get a link when we pull out of this in a few minutes. We also would like to know how this is working for you. There's a poll which will just asking about your level of satisfaction, very brief, and then the technical aspects. Did this work for you technically? We're getting a good response so far, but we want to know that you're watching and how it's working. So it takes about 28 seconds to do this poll, and it's up next to the questions bar. Also, we'd appreciate if you spread the word far and wide to your friends and let them know, hey, you can watch this. Or if they missed it, you say, oh my God, you missed Lisa Ferentz. Go to that website and it's free. Just click and you can have an hour with Lisa, not live, but there she'll be. Also, check out our leadingedgeseminars.org for all the news. And if you want to give me any feedback about anything at all, write me at michael@leadingedgeseminars.org. Lisa, thank you so much for
My
joining today.
pleasure.
It's
My
such
pleasure.
a pleasure. And I hope the rest of your day and tonight and tomorrow go extremely well. And of course, for everyone out there, our thoughts are all with each other these days. So do the best you can. Take a walk if you can. Have an ice cream sundae if you can. I'm talking to myself right now.
I'm going to make one for lunch.
And do the best you can. And Monday, Terry Reel. Tuesday, Lynn Grotsky. And another great trauma person, John Briere, is coming on Wednesday for lunch. So
You
join
get
us for lunch.
you get
Pardon?
amazing you get amazing people. I'm always so honored that I somehow get into that group. You really do get such wonderful people. It's
Thanks,
great.
Lisa. Okay, everybody. Thanks and have a great day and weekend.
Be safe, be well.
Bye.